Well, hey, Rolling Hills Church, so glad that you joined us again for another week of our series, Resilient. And I am so fired up about today because we are honored to have two of my heroes, two of my favorite people just in the world joining us today, sharing their story with us as a church, Jay and Katherine Wolf. And I'll never forget the first time I heard them speak was actually back in 2017 at a Passion Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. I was on staff at a church in Atlanta called Passion City Church back then. And from the moment I heard them share their story and talk about their journey, I just knew that God was raising them up as a voice in the world to bring hope, to bring healing, to bring endurance and resilience to all of us, whether you're going through an incredibly traumatic experience or whether you're just a human on planet Earth dealing with the reality of life. Their story is so powerful, and the way that they have processed it, the way that they can articulate what they've been through is a blessing, not just for the church, but I think for the world in this season. And so really excited to have them with us today. They are the author of two incredible books, and I just want to give a shameless plug right now. If you haven't read Hope Heals or Suffer Strong, you need to jump on Amazon and buy both of those books right now. They are absolutely phenomenal. Incredible resources for you in this season, but just in your life in general. Jay and Katherine have been featured on news outlets and conferences all over the world. God has really raised them up to just be a voice for us in this generation. And so it's an honor, it's a privilege to have them with us today, and we are so excited for that. So Jay and Katherine, how you guys doing?
Oh, doing great. So glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. So glad that we could make this happen. You know, you guys were supposed to be here in person, I think just a few weeks back, and then COVID-19 happened and the world turned upside down. And so here we are on Zoom with the rest of the world.
Gosh, we hate that we're not in person with y'all, but so glad we can solve a conversation.
We'll do a rain check. We miss California.
I know, man. That's right. You all are from here. And so we can't wait to hopefully in the future have you guys out here in person at church. But hey, I thought it'd be good for maybe those in our church or those who are listening in who don't know you guys, just for you guys to give a little overview of your story, to share a little more kind of about the journey that God has had you all on for, 12 years now. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. You want to? Sure. Yeah. So we, Katherine and I are from the South originally. We moved to California after we married when we were young, had sort of this magical, newlywed couple of years plugging into the church. And I was in law school at the time. Katherine was doing just some adventures in the entertainment industry and even had a baby along the way and just sort of had everything going for us. And then a couple of weeks before I was supposed to graduate in the spring of 2008, Katherine suffered a massive stroke out of the clear blue. No warning, no symptoms. We didn't know this was coming, no family history, none of that. In fact, I was home in a short window between my final classes to our married housing dorm when she had the stroke even. And I was able to call the ambulance and get her to UCLA Medical Center. Sort of a top neurosurgeon really in the world just happened to be on call and didn't even know if he could do anything to help her or if he could attempt surgery because it was the largest of this AVM was the thing that caused the stroke, this malformation. She'd actually had since birth, but had no knowledge of it or warning of it. And had 4 aneurysms on top of it, was surrounding her brainstem, just was, really a hopeless circumstance and a catastrophic injury in her brain causing the stroke. So by the grace of God, he decided though to give her a chance. And even though I was a lawyer, like that was not helping his decision to actually do the surgery. And yet he did. And she came out on April 22nd. And he said she lived, and he didn't know if she was going to wake up. It had been 16 hours. They'd removed part of her brain, had done a lot of damage to the nerves and even the brain stem. And they were just like, she's alive, but we don't know what will be if she'll wake up even or be paralyzed or whatever. And so it was this slow sort of unveiling of a process. But for me, I felt God had spared her life for a reason, and that was the beginning of hope in my story and in our story. And it would be, months, and it would be for her to even wake up, much less sort of, for the shock to wear off of what had happened to us. It would take years, and it would, just be a lot of highs and lows. And it continues to this day. It's been 12 years now, but we, just had no idea what it would look like, what our life being just absolutely turned upside down would look like. And it's been harder in so many ways than we imagined, but also more profoundly meaningful and beautiful and redemptive. And fast forward a little bit to a couple years ago, Katherine was able to get the approval of her doctors and get pregnant and had a baby, a miracle baby, John, in 2015. So lots of, just reminders of life where there should only be death, which is really the gospel story. But that's sort of how God's sort of given us this vision of our own story to offer up to people in their own struggles and stuff.
Man, that's so good. I noticed on social media, Katherine, that you recently celebrated your 12-year anniversary of life. And I thought that was so awesome. You want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I had the stroke on April 21st, but I had 16 hours of brain surgery through the night. So at 6 a.m. on April 22nd, the doctor came into where my family was and told Jay and the family that I had lived. So we celebrate that. It's Katherine Live Day, and we have a big party, and it's my birthday. It's really cute, actually.
Second chance birthday.
We've always said second chance birthday, and for some reason this year, my 12-year-old says every time, "It is your third birthday, Mom. It is third birthday. You were born again in Christ, and this is a third time. So get it right, Mom. Third birthday."
12-year-old.
Which I thought was pretty sweet. Yeah.
That's pretty profound. That's pretty good right there.
I know. It made sense.
Wow, man. I love it.
We've had the opportunity to celebrate in
A
different
lot,
ways.
yeah, it's weird.
Sort of, had the four of us at home getting to really give thanks for how far God's brought us. And I think in so doing that, we all get to remember not only where God's brought us from, but where he'll continue bringing us to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Amen. That's such a powerful part of your story too, not just where you've come from, but how you see God repurposing your pain. And Jay, and either of you can talk into this, but I heard you say recently, and I'm going to butcher it, but you can clean it up for me, that there's always a gap between our expectations of what life is going to be and then where life actually ends up being. And often that in that gap is some form of suffering, some sort of let down expectations or some sort of disillusionment. Would you unpack that a little bit? Because I think, that is a reality for all of us. That's something all of us are going to face in life at some point, is a gap between our expectation for life and then what actually happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have, again, used our story really as this word picture, and we've hoped it not just to be this sort of dissociated, that's like an encouraging testimony or whatever, but that's not my life. And really, we believe that this is all of our stories because it's the story of God in the world. It's the story of all of us struggling through life, stories that we didn't probably expect that we'd be living in some way or another. And I think we wrote this book recently called Suffer Strong, and really on purpose used that sort of mix of sort of this provocative idea that we could both experience suffering, but also at the same time find the strength in it. And again, we didn't want people to be like, I didn't have, a medical issue, or I don't have a disability or whatever. So that's not for me. And I think so often that's how we view pain, is like, that's not for me. That's not about me. That's not my story. And so when we view it that way, we don't want to get involved in it, in other people's struggles and be a part of the healing and the help. And so for us, I think we're all on the spectrum. If you're a human, you're born into a world that puts you on the spectrum of struggle. And like it or not, no matter how competent you are, or healthy or wealthy or resourceful or whatever, you're going to find yourself facing storms at some point. And at the very least, just if we expect our life is going to be here and the reality of our life is here, and that space between there is this opportunity for disenchantment and fear and anxiety and stress and suffering. So what's beautiful, though, is that we get to maybe not choose our circumstance, but choose how we view our circumstance, choose the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, choose how we re-narrate what's happened to us as it informs what we think about and how we anticipate our future, right? So, for us, we've just encouraged people to say, look, you are struggling. We share that as humans. We share that story of suffering and struggle, but we share that possibility of strength too, especially when we have this lens of God in us. We don't have to view the unknowns with such fear. We get to live fully, even in the midst of the pain.
Yeah. Maybe unpack that a little bit more. So obviously every day you wake up, there's, probably some sense of a different reality than what you expected when you first got married, go back 13 years ago, 14 years ago, right? And like all of us, there's that temptation to be like, why me? Like, what on earth? And the narratives, I imagine, can creep in for all of us, whether it's we've lost a job, whether it's our marriage isn't going the way we thought it was going to go, whether it's, a life-altering disability that we weren't expecting, whether it is any number of things on this spectrum. What are some of the things that you do, Katherine, to kind of shift your perspective? Or what are the things that you say to re-narrate yourself and look at this through God's lens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably the most important thing is gratitude. I mean, it always comes back to gratitude, I think, for what remains when things are gone, or instead of wishing it was still the way it used to be, pivoting and loving what is and what remains is the key always. And recognizing, just as Jay was saying, that it's about re-narrating it. The summer after I had my stroke, when I was still like a really bad off, I couldn't even eat food yet, nothing. I would type with my one hand on my blog that someone else has set up when I was at the hospital, and I would always include a point of gratitude. And that was like a thing, is I would say like, oh, please pray for me, all this like long list of horrible things. And then like, the point of gratitude of how there is like some joy here that we need to celebrate. And somehow that like was me preaching to my own heart for sure, but also re-narrating it to say, here is some good in this terrible storm. And then that, of course, brings you to a place of thanksgiving to God. Look what you're doing in this messed up story. Thank you for that. And it really reinforces a level of just joy and celebration in the hard stuff.
Yeah, that's so good. I recently, Katherine, I heard you speak on this whole idea of invisible wheelchairs and how everybody carries with them some sort of brokenness. And I even love that in your life mission statement, you really talk about bringing hope to whether it's those with external disabilities or internal disabilities. And all of us have brokenness. We're all a mess. Like, everybody is in need of the grace of God. And I just would love to hear you talk on that a little bit. Just unpack that idea of invisible wheelchairs and kind of what that means to you.
Yeah. We believe we all have wheelchairs. Some of us, like me, have external ones that you see, but everybody's got big wheelchairs in here that you don't see. Everybody's been through a lot of stuff and has a lot of brokenness, and there's all different brands of brokenness between us all, everybody. But we all get to celebrate the same story of strength through our suffering found in Jesus. So it's all actually so similar. It looks so different, but it's so similar.
We had a big, I think, connection and epiphany related to that too, that if Katherine's wheelchair, which some people might say you're wheelchair bound or you're confined to a wheelchair or something, because it feels like it's an expression of your limitations, I guess. And it's even the thing that is limiting you. You can't walk because you have a wheelchair. Well, if you really think about it more closely, because she can't walk well, her wheelchair is the thing that allows her to be in the world. It allows her, it's the means for her to be in the world, to be free, even to do her life again. I think about when we used to travel, which feels like a very long time ago, but when you go to the Atlanta airport, it's a massive sprawling thing. Like, if you don't have a wheelchair and you can't walk, like, that's a real problem, and you're not going to really go anywhere quickly. So Katherine can, she got a new little electric wheelchair, and she just can go. She just beats me out of security and is on, the train down wherever we're heading. And I think in that same way, and it's a bold statement, but I think if a physical wheelchair can be the avenue to freedom, then maybe our invisible wheelchairs can be too. And again, that makes sense maybe only in the upside down kingdom of God. And part of the upending of our life, we have said, is what has given us this view to the upside down kingdom. We're talking about, the beatitude, just like this way of Jesus in the world doesn't manifest like in our flesh. We want it to, or the systems and structures of the world and power want it to. It looks like, the weak getting the front of the line, the meek inheriting the earth, just like the way up first being brought low. So that's sort of just this eye-opening experience we've had. And then we've worked with and become advocates for people with disabilities too in this season. And frankly, it took a little while. I think it wasn't in our minds to say, oh, you're experiencing profound disabilities. We should be advocates for, other people like us, other families like us. It was like, no, Catherine's going to get out of the wheelchair. That's the hope. And, it was just such a reversal of our life that it took many years to sort of say, maybe this is part of what God has for us to wear, not just sort of to survive through, but to, with honor, cherish this opportunity to sort of be poster children for, this sort of experience of so many folks in the world. Like the largest minority group in the world is people with disabilities, the largest unchurched people group. And it's also in the US too, not just the world. And so what do we do with that as the church if we're, maybe we just don't have eyes to see the opportunity right in front of us, and it's no shame, we're all just humans. We don't want to think about the reality of our fragility and mortality. And we don't really, jump into those kind of stories usually, but the truth is like we're missing a part of the fullness of the body of Christ if we don't have a seat at the table for every kind of ability, every kind of hard story. And so that's just been so motivating and beautiful to us to sort of have eyes to see that story of disability, because really it's all of our stories.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's so powerful because, I heard a pastor say one time, your brokenness can actually be the bridge by which God's work makes its way into your life.
Yeah.
And whether it's an external wheelchair or an internal wheelchair, it's these things where oftentimes in our shame, we push that away, we hide it, we don't deal with it, we run from it, we think God is ashamed of us in it. And yet if we just bring the brokenness to him, if we'd come to him in our shame and say, Lord, really, you love me here? There is a sense of that opens us up to healing. And oftentimes the things that we're most ashamed of in our life can be the bridge for God's work. And I just hear you guys saying that.
That's
absolutely.
2 Corinthians 12:9. I think it's
right. His power is made perfect in our weakness.
Right. And that's not the gospel most of us want to hear. It's like, when you're at your, the top of your game and you're at your fullness of capacity and health and wealth and prosperity and abundance, that's where you find God. It's like, no, when you know for sure it had nothing to do with you, when all the distractions of yourself are pushed to the side, that's when you see who God really is.
Right.
Katherine, I know you've got good days and bad days. You've got highs and lows like everybody else. But, you exude joy, unlike many people I know. And I think there's something in that for you. And one of the things that, again, I've heard you say before is this whole idea of more, this acronym of more, mornings of redefining everything. And that kind of goes back to what we were saying on perspective. But, what does it look like for you to live in joy, knowing full well that, hey, not every day is joyful, not every day is great, but there is a deep abiding hope and joy in you. Where does that come from? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I don't fully know the answer at all, but I think when there is basically, I've walked with the Lord completely imperfectly, but since I was my earliest memories. I've always had life with Jesus as part of my story. So somehow life with Jesus, deeply immersed in scripture, kind of eventually led, even after this, to believing that the truest things of him were true in my life. And I think that as a result of that, I get to live well into my story. And it's kind of all like circular. Like when you're living well in your story and you like your story, you feel good about it. So of course you have joy, and then it makes your story better. And it kind of just goes round and round. And I think maybe before I even actually knew this was what was happening, or I didn't have language for it yet, but I have always felt that inside of us, that passage, Psalm 84:11, that no good thing does he withhold. And that's so complex. But somehow I've always felt that so deeply, that the really good stuff of God was inside of me, the true good stuff. So no one can take that away. No situation can. I love the G.K. Chesterton quote that's the secret weapon of the Christian life is joy. And I think I've always kind of really resonated with the notion of fighting back with joy. And sort of the clearer manifestation of that is redefining. So when you redefine the world, you live with joy, even in the things that the world would consider not okay.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that goes back to this idea that, in some ways pain is a stewardship and a calling. And that's kind of a crazy, like, the Western American Christian church does not like to hear that. It is like, hey, if I'm experiencing pain, get me out of here. I need to numb that out and run from that without knowing that, man, maybe God has a purpose in that. And Jay, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little more, but I think that is a huge idea for us as a church, or Katherine, whoever wants to take it. But this idea that God entrusts us with certain stories,
Yeah.
Well, I think, again, going back to that idea of this shared experience of humanity is struggle and suffering and life not turning out how you thought it would. And I think look a little outside of, even the Western bubble. And frankly, we don't really have to look that far at this point. We're kind of all having a global awakening, as painful as it is. I think it's not going to be wasted. And I pray that it starts to connect our hearts together to the reality of our struggle as humans, our need for hope. And I think we have seen, particularly in our own very specific places of wounding, that there is this opportunity for us to use that to enter into somebody else's similar circumstance and find healing together. And I think what's the human and natural response is that we don't want to go back to the places that hurt us, let alone just even memories of them. We've been traumatized, we've been wounded, this was an ending or a loss in our life, and we don't want to revisit that. But I think God has allowed those places and those pains in our life so that we might have this deep knowledge of our struggle and the weightiness of that, but then the possibility for overcoming it because of Jesus. And so we get to go back. So we, like I referenced a minute ago, we weren't always like on the huge disability advocacy train. It was almost too painful. Like, this couldn't be our reality. We want to go back to how life used to be. And then over years, and from just knowing people and hearing stories of people from that community, we began to see, wow, these are our people. And so we went back, so to speak, to that place of our wounding, those brain rehabs, those stroke centers, the hospitals. And it was like, God, we don't like anywhere but there. Like, it's just too deeply painful. And yet God was saying, but if you go back to those places and tell them that this suffering is not the end of their story, they're going to listen to you. And so it's been this just holy burden. It's a heavy thing, but it is a holy thing to feel like, wow, my pain is going to be redeemed. Like, this is not what looks like it was just, the story's just been chopped off. There's something new growing up out of it. And not only that, but I get to be a part of newness of life and somebody else's wounding too. And so that idea of hoping it forward, I think in 2 Corinthians 1, it's Paul talking about you've been given comfort. So you're comforted because you're in pain or you're wounded or you're in need. Not so you can just be comfortable. That's not the end of the progression of why God gives us comfort. He gives us comfort so that we can give that comfort away to others. And in the giving away, that they'll know the God of all comfort. So it's this opportunity we get to be a part of perpetuating the hope of Christ in the world. And in so doing, we find our healing, and other people find their healing too.
So powerful. And I just think when people face some life-altering, experience of suffering, it can be so quick to say, this is the end for me. This is it. It's over. My life is never going to be what I thought it was. And if you could speak a word of hope to somebody in that spot right now, who's like, something just happened to me that feels like the end of my story, Katherine, what would you say to them?
I would say it's not the end of the story. It's simply a new beginning of a story, a better story. It's absolutely the chance for something new. That don't discount what's possible now. It's different. Like, probably we don't give ourselves credit for doing much right in our story. It was all Jesus. But perhaps what we did do right was pivot and say, we thought we were going this way, our lives are going this way, but we're going with it. And we're able to pivot and say, like, okay, so what does God have now? We're going to dream new dreams and figure this out as we go. And that ability is the difference between people who can, like, adjust to the new normal and thrive there, and people who are always looking back and wishing it was the way it used to be, which is stupid because it's never going to be that way, honestly, for any of us. Yeah. Even in the best stories, you don't go back to the way it used to be. Something new is born. Is that encouraging?
Yeah, a little bit. We'll take it.
Okay, yeah, I hope so.
No, it's fantastic, but it's that pivot that is so important. And I think a lot of people get stuck in the pivot. They get haltered there, and they're holding on to what used to be, and it's hard for them to envision what could be next. And what would you even say? Like, how did that work for you, even in the midst of, and sometimes maybe you just stumble into it. You're like, I don't know what's coming next. I'm going to take this one day at a time, but I know I can't go back, and I've got to pivot somehow. So anything else you want to say about that season of pivoting, or what you would say to somebody who feels kind of stuck in the turn, like, how do I get out of that? And Jay, maybe you want to speak into it, or Katherine, either.
Two things come to mind. I think first, this idea of a tension that we live in that pivot, which is this tension of being called to an open-handedness about our life. And you realize that pretty quickly. You're like, oh, all these things I've been holding onto so tightly about my future, what I have to do, all the stressors of just life and performance and all that, like, in a way, those don't really matter. So I get to choose to either keep holding on tight to this thing that I don't have a whole lot of input to actually change, or I can open my hands to it. And in so doing, release some of this faux pressure we carry of sort of carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, carrying the sort of the opportunity to fix all these things that we were never meant to fix, nor can we anyway. And I think in so doing, we open our hands, we release a lot of that stress and struggle, and receive more of who God is in the midst of it. And then, living in that open-handed moment, as well as living with our whole hearts in it. Those two things are hard, because it's okay. You can like open your hands and kind of almost be like, well, just see what happens, open-handed. But I think God is like, but I still gave you life today. I've allowed this in your life. So I want you to be all in. And I want you not to bear the weight of having to have all these expectations for the outcomes. Let me handle that, but I still want you to be all in with your whole heart. And that's really hard if your heart's been broken before, because we just can't help but want to protect ourselves and not be all in. But I think that has been the work for us. How do we pivot into a new reality with our open hands, with our whole heart, giving it all we have? And I think that also, like, thinking about calling, and thinking about, in so many ways, gosh, yeah, you're in the entertainment industry. I was going to law school. And yet, at the core of it, our trajectory was never about those specific things. So in a way we pivoted, but in a way it's a culmination, I think, of so many things we've been called to all along in our lives. And looking back even on Catherine's childhood, she loved stories of the Holocaust and overcoming, Johnny Erickson Tata and Corrie ten Boom and civil rights heroes. Those were just like, those were the stories for some reason that she always connected to and was preaching to her dolls about the gospel, in her closet when she was a little kid. And and so now it's really not that far of a jump to see this isn't the way I'm sure she imagined it when she was a little kid. And myself, just the creative abilities and the, my lawyerly skills like that those have all sort of culminated into what we do with our lives now that we never saw coming in this specific way. But to Catherine's point, that phrase I think is so powerful to be open to dreaming new dreams. I think so often we're so informed by, frankly, dreams that we had when we were kids, and that's great. I think that that childlikeness is important, the wonder and the sort of like that ability to see the world through that lens. However, if we are defining those expectations versus our reality based on what we thought our life was going to be like before our brain was even formed when we were 8 years old, like it might be time, like Paul says, like when you're a child, you ate like a child, you drank like a yak child. Now you're an adult. Now you're going to put on the maturity of what it means to live into this season. And it may be time to sort of open up your eyes and your mind and your heart and ask God to give you some new dreams for your life. Folks who are in the midst of this kind of circumstance or suffering, like just need to give permission to just be in the pain, to offer it up to God with just, rawness and realness, but to know that there's more ahead, that they have eyes to see it that way and are open to God moving in a different direction than they thought.
I love that. And we'll close with this. We've been a little bit looking at the story of Joseph, and just an incredible story. So many implications to Christ, and what a story of resilience. But as I was rereading it and thinking through some sermon stuff for it, I just was struck by the fact that there were 22 years between when the dream was given and when he realized the dream, and there were a whole lot of pits and valleys and unjust circumstances and things outside of his control in the middle.
Right.
And I just think about that, where oftentimes when you're in the pit, when you're in that 5-year season of grief and trauma, you almost can never imagine how God's going to bring whatever dream you had to fullness for your life. Right. And Katherine, I'm sure that journey has been a really real journey for you. And now looking back, you can see more of God's hand. But I know that's kind of an open-ended thought, but anything you want to add or share about that?
Yeah, pretty much now, at least from where I sit today, it's weird. Your mind is weird because looking back, I'm like, everything my entire life led up to now. And I never knew that until, fairly recently. I don't even think right after my stroke, I could have recognized that when I was preaching to my dolls in my closet as a 6-year-old, then now I'd be preaching to big girls in bigger rooms and closets, but also closets, wherever. And that even my deep heart for disenfranchised groups of people, a little bit like random, that this girl from a world that did not experience a lot of up-close suffering would be so drawn to stories of suffering and the redemption of Christ in those stories. Now it just makes so much sense that God was always preparing me for what he had prepared for me. And I think that there's such hope in all of our stories that God is doing that.
Yeah. And I think the question is, how do we wait well? Because I think, even if you have a vision for what God's doing, it may not come in the same time frame that we would like it to come. And I think this is a great experience globally to sort of commiserate around that and to call each other towards perseverance in that. There's no clear way forward. There's a lot of unknowns. And I think how do we make sure that waiting is not wasted, and how do we continue to encourage each other to persevere in good works and to just dig more deeply into who God is during this time, especially of constraint and limitation. I think there's this real profound opportunity to find, Joseph, again, great example, in prison, whatever, like there's a clarity that comes. And I can only imagine just when he had this profound and vivid reality in his mind that he knew was coming, he just didn't know when, but that he found some incredible treasure in that waiting and that darkness. And it made him ready. Because sometimes, imagine 22 years later, you may be a little jaded when they're finally like, oh yeah, here, it's time to come,
Yeah.
They need you to interpret the dream. Be like, you're lying, like you're crazy, So how do we maintain not, our heart being soft towards God's purposes and not be, not have the waiting turn us into the opposite of what we know our future really is. And we get to do that together. It's not an individual journey. It's a communal journey that we get to just call that out in each other. Say, keep going.
I love that, man. We need each other. We need the body of Christ. You need community. You got to have people to pick up your arms and to do that. I know that's a huge part of your story. And I feel like we could talk all day. But gosh, just again, I want to just say thank you guys so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing just a slice of your story and your journey. I know it's going to be the biggest blessing to our church. It's been a blessing to me just to spend some time with you guys on Zoom.
Likewise, Holly. We want to meet you in person someday.
I know. Come on out anytime. Standing invitation. And so we can't wait for that day to come. But in the meantime, know that we love you guys. We're praying for you guys. And just going to continue to pray that God increases your influence and helps your story be shared on wider and wider platforms, pointing people to the hope of Christ and just the strength of Christ in the midst of the storms of life. So we love you guys. God bless you guys. And
thank you. Thank you.